Welcome back to the Iron Sights Podcast. I have the Josh Storms in the house. He is the head strength and conditioning coach out at Florida State University. Josh, welcome to the show, my dude.
Appreciate you having me on. Glad to be here.
First question, is Storms really your last name?
It is really my last name.
That is an awesome last name to be plastered across the back of a jersey, especially a dude of your stature with the direction you're coming at stuff from. I had to ask, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, it could definitely be way worse. That's for sure.
That is true. I've seen a lot of things where it's questionable, like for real. Thanks for taking time out, man. And what is, I know for strengthening and conditioning coaches, particularly for the guys working in football right now, it's a wild time. And when I say that, like people they couldn't possibly understand unless they've lived in that environment how actually wild that is. And I want to talk about your job and kind of what you do and what's happening right now. And then talk about the business of strength and conditioning, and then also get into some of the nuance of that coaching and kind of how you're doing it, what you're doing to advance athletes and help people, and keep it all together. But let's start with a little background on you, man. Why don't you give us the 411 on who Josh is and what you're about, dude?
Okay. Well, as born in Minnesota, grew up in South Dakota, played tight end at the University of South Dakota there in the late 90s. Pretty short, unremarkable, injury-plagued college football career, which that tends to be the case with several strength coaches. I must have been on that path before I even knew it. And through college, I spent more time training to play the game and preparing to play the game than I ever spent actually getting to play the game. And when I was done playing, I knew I still want to be, I love the game, love being around it, but I also knew I did not want to be a coach on the field. That never appealed to me at any point. And I realized this is the path that I want to take. And even in whatever 1998, 1999, this is still a very, very young profession. And so I got some volunteer experience one summer at a private facility in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and got extremely lucky there. The director of that program was a guy named Steve Bliss. And Steve came from like Boyd Epley's original crew at Nebraska. He was the first ever head strength coach at Miami, first ever head strength coach at Ohio State. And I caught him on the back end of his career as he'd gotten out of college and stuff. So he was a huge mentor to me early on, and just understand like this is a real profession that you can pursue. And so did that for a summer, and then went back to school, finishing classes, needed an internship to graduate. Because I didn't know any better, I sent out 2 resumes, one to the Kansas City Chiefs, one to the Minnesota Vikings. Interviewed for both those. I actually got offered both of them. And
that's bold. That's a bold thing to do, dude, as a young guy.
It's only bold if you know what you're doing. There was more so.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of Forrest Gump in my career. And so the day after Christmas in, I guess that would have been, 99, I think. It would have been Christmas 99, accepted the job at the Vikings. So went back to school, went up there during spring break, worked OTAs, went back to school, finished the semester, moved back up there in May to work the off-season program as an unpaid intern. And then they put me in a paid seasonal position throughout the 2000-2001 season. Coach Green got fired at the end of that season. We all went our different ways. I knew I still needed to go to grad school, so I needed that experience. And once again, I literally had zero college network at all whatsoever. So I knew one college strength coach, and that's who I reached out to. And the only reason I knew that one college strength coach was we had some guys on the roster of the Vikings at that time who lived in Vegas and spent their summers at UNLV training with Mark Philippi. So, and that was pre-internet days. So I'm searching through directories, trying to find a way to contact this guy that I don't know, and got in touch with him and just offered, I want to learn, I'll work, whatever you want. And basically said, yeah, if you want to come out, you can come out. So my wife and I got married that summer, and 5 days later we moved to Vegas, and for me to take an unpaid internship, and she had no job, and no one in either of our families ever said, hey, this is a bad fucking idea. You guys will do great. And off we went. So spent 2.5 years out there. At one point I had 3 jobs. I was taking 6 credits. I was volunteering in the X-Phys lab and still performing my duties as an intern in the weight room there. So that was about 3 hours of sleep at home at night and about a 45-minute nap in my truck during the day, and one thing to the next thing to the next thing. And that kind of pared itself down over time. So I got to the point where I was eventually just taking classes and then had a paid position in the weight room, which is essentially they didn't have a GA position, so I was still paying my own tuition, but it was a restricted earnings coaching position. So did that for a couple seasons. Got an opportunity when Joe Ken hired me in Arizona State in 2005. Went down there and then was fortunate to spend 11 seasons at Arizona State. So went through 3 head coaches and 4 ADs. And so got kind of lucky. At the point of most guys' careers, when you're making a move every 2 years trying to climb that ladder, I did that all from the same office. So when I got there, I was our, lowest paid entry level full-time guy. And then when I left there, I was our top assistant. I was football only. And then from there, moved on with Coach Norvell at the University of Memphis. So when Todd Graham's football staff came in there, Coach Norvell was the offensive coordinator. Him and I had a really good relationship. And then when that opportunity presented itself for him, I got the call the night he got the job. I got the call to let me know I was going to. So then was on to Memphis for 4 years, making that transition to being a head strength coach, and the learning curve that comes along with that. You find out no matter how prepared you think you are, you're not as prepared as you think you are. First thing I learned there was like, as being the head guy, is like, you don't get to second guess decisions anymore. Like, you don't get to have opinions, you have to make decisions, and in real time. And so, adjusting to that, and had great staff there, was able to coach some awesome kids there. We won a ton of games in 4 years, played for the conference championship 3 times, won it once, and then got the opportunity to come here to Florida State. So after the Cotton Bowl in 2019, flew back with the team, took a nap at the house, did some laundry. My wife Darcy and son Colt and I hopped in the truck in the morning, drove to Tallahassee. It was dark when we got here, woke up in the morning to figure out where we were living at now, and started house shopping. And here we are 4 years later.
Man, that was a lot. And it's I'm listening to it. There's so many things coming out of this. First, just, I opened this up by saying I'm sure things are uber crazy right now, but the life of a strength and conditioning coach, to even get to the point that you're at in your career, like, what's crazy anymore? Like, what's wild? I mean, it's a constant grind. And you just articulated a story that, while it's your own story, and all the strength and conditioning coaches I've ever talked to that have made it to the level that you're at, and as a professional that's earning a living, supporting their family, and loves doing it, has a very, very similar story. And that's just one of, look, you have to be really sure this is what you fucking want, because it's going to be a grind. And while you said, I got super fortunate, like at Arizona, I was in the same spot for 11 years. Regardless, there's stuff going on there that you have to, like you said, grind out. And the last thing I would say to that is, as these guys tell their story, there's always that moment where they go, I got so lucky at this point, and at this point with this particular mentor in this particular way. And guys look back and they really honor that. They're just, guys like you are just looking at it, go, look, if this hadn't happened, or if I hadn't met this person, or I hadn't been in this right place at this right time, or when opportunity met, like kind of the reality of the situation that was going on, who knows where I would be, because there's so many people that have started and stopped this process, and will never make it to the level that you had, because sometimes it's a matter of capability. They just don't have it, or they don't have the work ethic. And then there's always a little bit of luck that comes into that
Yeah,
too.
I mean, it's to make it in this business long term. And one of my guys told me this a long time ago, and he's like, it's a war of attrition. He goes, every year guys are going to burn out and they're going to get out of the business, and that opens up opportunities for guys who are still willing to grind it out and stay in. And the longer you can stay in, I mean, obviously, you got to do a good job. People got to see value in you as a person and what you can provide their program and all that. But that doesn't matter if you're not also willing to grind it out too. So those two things have to coincide with each other to make it. So, you gotta, you become, the story's quick, but I look back now and that's 24 years,
Yeah. It happens fast. I mean, you just nailed it too. This is a performance-based business. You're either performing or you're not. Like, your athletes are either performing or they're not. They're either getting injured or they're not, or the percentage of injuries is either reducing or it's not. And you're able to get a player back into action, or you're not. Those are metrics that are measured on a regular basis, on a daily basis, and obviously a season by season basis. And when coaches leave, often the first guy that goes is going to be that S&C guy too, the strength and conditioning coach. Like, if a head coach gets canned, or has to move on for whatever reason, usually the strength and conditioning coaches, they don't make the cut beyond that. They're gone too. So the fact that you were like at a place like Arizona or wherever for multiple seasons with multiple coaches, for those people that know, that speaks a lot, very highly of the metrics that you were likely achieving during that time, because you can only get so lucky. right? This is not a business or a place where you can hide behind, a name most of the time. Because again, you're either winning or you're not. Your athlete's either performing or not, which ultimately
Yeah,
means you're either performing
and
or
you
not.
gotta believe in yourself too, and not be afraid to advocate for yourself at times when the time is right. When I was at Arizona State, when Dennis Erickson's staff got fired and they hired Todd Graham as the new head coach, we already knew who his strength coach was. Because typically, if you got a head football coach, head strength coach with a good relationship, like that's a package deal more often than not, right? And
Yep.
So we knew he was bringing, he was coming in, and obviously he has a staff. He has a staff too, so you're going to expect that he's going to bring his staff with him, and we had some in between time because we were getting ready for bowl prep. We were playing the Las Vegas Bowl that year, and so basically the staff that had just been fired is still there operating, get ready to go play this bowl game. And then on the third floor above them is what was there for the new football staff working on recruiting and getting their feet on the ground and stuff too. And, I knew at one point, this after my boss, the head guy, had been already notified he was going to be let go. None of us have been told anything yet. And I'm like, I'm still here for a month. Right. And so, I didn't particularly care to leave, but at the same time, I was like, you know what, there's two things you can do when your staff gets fired. Some guys will say, well, fuck it, they're going to fire me anyways. They cash it in. They ride out their last few days and basically give the new staff every reason possible. Like, well, of course we're going to let this guy go.
Yep.
Or you can stay in place and do your fucking job, right? And my thing is I'm loyal to the kids. That's why I'm here, is because the kids. Well, at that point, we set a whole football team there, get ready to go play a bowl game. I'm going to stay there and take care of the kids. And so I actually went up to the third floor, unannounced, to talk to coach, and, told Coach Graham, I said, listen, I introduced myself, who I was, told him what my title and role was. To that point, I'm sure he had no idea. And I just told him, I said, listen, I'm the assistant strength coach. My job is to assist the head strength coach. I know you're bringing in Coach Griswold. I said, I need his number. I need to be able to contact him. I got to be able to know what he knows, what he needs to be ready to roll when he gets here, because he was still at Pitt getting ready for their bowl game as well, kind of a similar situation, just on the other end of it, And I said, I got to make sure that he's set up for success when he gets here. And, I knew doing that, they could have easily used me for every bit of work and information and every other piece along the way and still let me go anyways. Or that says something about you as a man and how you're wired and where your compass is at to that job and those loyalties and whatnot. And I'm like, if I'm going to get fired, I'm going to go out and do it the way I think it should be done. Right. And so that's just the path I took. And that conversation had a huge impact on not just my relationship with Coach Graham, but also my ability to stay there and stay employed at Arizona State for the next, 4 years before I moved on to Memphis.
I was just gonna ask, but I think you just answered it. The follow-up question was just what did that mean for you and your family? And you just said it. If you think differently, if your mindset's even a little bit different there, and again, you're throwing up your hands, I'm out, whatever. Okay, I'm getting fired, whatever. What does that ultimately mean? Well, maybe you get another job somewhere else. Maybe you don't. But if you do, that means the family has to pick up and move yet again, which is part of the life. And so when, kids don't necessarily sign on for that. Often spouses do, because they kind of get it. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I'm sure we don't have to get into all of that, but you can't do this without your number one fans usually. And that's going to be your family, you hope. But if you're not, you're thinking about the kids. You mentioned the kids as athletes and what they had in front of them, and that time in their life maybe, and that was going to be their one opportunity to kind of shine and get something accomplished to remember by and move forward in life, and uses kind of that reach back to how do I get through tough things in my life. Same goes for your family and the stuff you're doing. These are messages that I think are often lost in the journey or the hard work process. People see the end. They see he's the head strength and conditioning coach. Tell me what education I need to have, right? Where do I have to go to school? What certifications do I need to have? And all that stuff. But, again, the guys that I know that have ultimately been successful, while that is obviously uber important, what the education is those lessons in life and how to manage the adversity, because that's ultimately what you're doing on a daily fucking basis as a strength and conditioning coach at a major college.
No doubt. There's no doubt. It comes a lot of different ways too, And, I think a lot of the, my deal at Arizona State, maybe just me in general life, I'm probably too stubborn to quit in a lot of cases, So I decided if I was to go out, on my shield my way there. And if I had to find the next thing, I would go find the next thing. But fortunately for me, my next thing was still right there in the same office I'd just spent the previous 6 years in.
Yeah. what a great story, man. And I knew very little about it, but so thanks for resharing it in the way that you just did. And I always say this when I have strength and conditioning guys on, to those aspiring coaches out there, and whatever you're coaching, right? Whatever you're coaching, but particularly obviously the strength and conditioning guys that are like, yeah, I want to work with the pro team someday. I want to work at, with college athletes. You just heard all the stuff that you're going to need to do in order to stay into this business, wrapped into like a 3-minute kind of bio. Hopefully you're ready to settle into that, because that's what it's really like. I've never heard it told a different way. Again, everybody has their own story, but it usually starts and stops with, I got lucky. I had to work really hard. I slept on a few couches. I had to build strong relationships, and almost like the term network isn't even a strong enough word to describe what you build or have to build around you in order to be successful in this game. And again, I'm only talking from an outside observer and somebody that was a recipient of guys like you and the stuff that you brought to the table. So
yeah, and even in those situations, your network is only as good as your worth, right? I mean, if you're bringing high value and high worth to your position and to the athletes you coach, it's funny that you suddenly have a much stronger network looking out for you when those times come when you do need to fall back on that network, right?
100%.
And that's what's one thing I always, with young coaches getting this business, like, a few things I tell them is, one, don't try to talk them out of it, first of all, because you got to find out, do they really, really want this? And two, if you are going to pursue this, like your significant other, boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, husband, whoever, like, you got to do a great job of educating them what it is going to be like. Like my son's grown up not much different than like your military brat kids, right? It's 3 or 4 years here, it's 3 or 4 years there, and when it's time to move, like it's not your choice, maybe where you're moving, when you're moving, or even why you're moving, And then also too is just it's the relationships along the way. Like you can know everything you want to know with the science and in the books and all these things. But if you're not equally adept at being able to build relationships and communicate and reach people, then you're going to feel wondering why you're not getting that opportunity. Well, just because you know all this, like, can you convey it? Can you build relationships? Like, are you a person that people like to work with, right? And all that stuff's equally important. You got to be able to do both. Because if you're just a great relationship guy and a great motivator and all this, but man, you don't know your head from your ass when it comes to programming and training, good luck. Well,
right.
you can recite the super training book to me word for word, but if you can't reach a kid and you can't communicate to coaches, good luck. You got to be a little bit of a Swiss Army knife to be a head strength coach, because you got to be a lot of things to a lot of different people. Most of all your family, and you got to be a totally different person when you go home to do that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to this in having great leaders, or recognizing that they've had a few along the way. And then also on the flip side of that, obviously recognizing that people were in positions that the position was maybe just too big for them, or that they had an opportunity to adapt to and adjust to, and they just couldn't do it or wouldn't do it, is probably more likely. But what I think what you're really talking about at the end of the day, without putting words in your mouth, is just leadership and leadership skill along the way. And I mean, you're charged with a pretty big responsibility. I mean, Florida State's no freaking joke, man. I mean, they have a long history of winning. Winning is important at Florida State at every level, but particularly on the football field. I mean, I remember as a kid growing up, I had some Seminoles hats and jerseys and stuff, watching some of those guys come up and really respecting how things were being handled at the time. Only knowing what I knew as a young guy, but you could see like there was a purpose behind the coaching, and obviously the program and the great programs always did. You just articulated, I think, what makes that happen. And so without kind of going on about that, I could talk to you about those experiences all day long. And you probably have some really great stories, some really cool war stories about what happened on and off the field, in the locker room or in the training room or whatever. But like I think just kind of catching people up, like what you just kind of said, like what it takes to get there. Like you're right in it right now, right? I mean, the season has just started. Talk to us about that. What's life like on a daily basis for you at the moment?
So a daily basis right now, we're just going into week 3. So really right before I hopped on here, we just got out of an afternoon staff meeting. So kind of the way our program's set up is we practice in the mornings. Part of it, we do that because of academics, but really and truly the main reason we do it is like, you got to think like all of us when you're 18 to 22 years old, we're all wired to be active and alert and stuff at night, not so much in the mornings, right? And all of a sudden now, like us this week, you're playing a noon kickoff, pregame meals at 8 a.m. You got to be ready to roll and go out and perform at a high level and play ball early. So that's part of the reason why we practice in the mornings. So which means our day starts early. Like my young guys, my developmental lift group, they'll lift in the mornings before practice. That whether it be 6 a.m. or 7 a.m., depending which day of the week we're on. From there, we'll transition out of that into a staff meeting. I'll come down at the staff meal, knock my own training out in the morning before practice. As soon as I'm, get to practice, get through stretch. We'll have some guys work with some return to play and reconditioning stuff. Couple of roles and stuff that we fulfilled during the course of practice. As soon as practice is over, depending what day of the week it is, I'll have two other separate lift groups. Basically, one group is kind of like our 2 deep group, and the other group is more like developmental vets that aren't playing as many snaps. Those guys will lift immediately after practice. So then by 1:30 or so, most of the kids are done, gone, out of here. Time to get organized for the next day. Time for a little professional development. Go back. I'll rehash stuff with Jackson Schaefer, my sports science guy. I'll get with Josh Chapman, our head athletic trainer, to go through any of the injury stuff that popped up, where guys are at in the process, and then before you know it, you're on to the next one.
Yeah, I think you just kind of articulated like it's a fast moving deal, and it takes an entire team of people to make this happen, and you're not doing anything inside a vacuum, right? You got all this stuff. Let's talk about the players actually for a second. What like how involved are you in like the player selection or like position selection? For like a game, even for like the team, but even in from a week to week situational perspective, like the lineup, I guess, or whatever, what does that look like from a strength and conditioning coach's perspective where you're at? I mean, it might be different other places, but
yeah, for that here, and I don't know too many strength coaches where they have any impact on how that's going to look or whatnot. Kind of from in the recruiting process, obviously we meet, talk to recruits that come through, get a chance to kind of start building relationships with those guys. Part of it is, for us, pulling back the curtain, let them know what it's going to be like when they get here. We have a very upfront approach to recruiting. We definitely, our sales pitch is, this program is not for everybody. It's only for real ones. This is one of the hardest places you can come to play. There's a lot of other places that'll be easier to play at than coming to Florida State. And we were very transparent with that in the process with those guys. And that helps us get the right kind of guys in the door to begin with. And so we'll provide some feedback on what we thought of certain kids, personalities, how they took in certain information and whatnot. There's guys we have questions on body types and stuff. Obviously, a lot of times our player personnel guys will kind of consult with us, or position coach will consult with us on, do you think this kid can realistically develop up? And, you might have a young DN that's 6'5", but he's still 205 pounds. And is this a guy that could be a 250 guy, or is his frame going to limit him, or what's it going to look like? And so we'll provide some insight and educated guesses on that, and then, and really that's kind of our piece of, player selection and recruiting and roster building and whatnot. Then at the end of the day, just my job once they bring those kids here is to get them on board and build the machine they need to go play college football, and some guys are great athletes and they're terrible in the weight room. So if I can close that gap, great. Some guys are awesome in the weight room and maybe not as great athletically. So it's my job to help close the gap on that end. And, every kid's gonna be a little bit different coming in. We get guys that are, multiple times state powerlifting champs, because, powerlifting's a high school sport in Florida. Or we'll get some guys who are equally talented who have never put their hands on a barbell in their life. And so I kind of meet those kids where they are and get them into your way, your fold, your system, and bring them along as best you can in the development piece of things.
Yeah, this goes back to the connection piece that you were talking about, just being able to kind of get your hands on a kid and get them to kind of buy into the process. I think that's kind of the next question. I think it starts with the staff. Talk about, then we can get to the kids, but talk about that, managing that staff and those relationships, and how does that get done? Is it all coming from the head coach? Is it really up to the coaches to make sure that they're having those communications? I guess if I looked at it from a corporate structure, what does that communication plan look like on a daily basis? What does that culture kind of look and feel like? Because when you spend that much time, there's that much intensity. I imagine sometimes it goes really well, and other times you might even be butting heads, or just somebody has a bad day and it doesn't go smooth. Can you talk about the realities of that?
Yeah, and sometimes those situations where there is conflict or you are butting heads, oftentimes if that's handled the right way, that's oftentimes where really good relationships can start from.
Mhm.
Right. And getting that kid to understand, like, yo, I came down on you that way because of this. I see this in you and I saw your standard. You told me what you want out of this game. You told me what you're trying to accomplish here. And I'm watching your actions that matched up with what you told me you want.
Mm.
Well, you got to understand, my
Mhm.
job is to help you get what you want. Right. And I'll tell my guys, my staff all the time, I got no problem if you have to go in on a kid, don't hesitate, do it, pull the trigger on it. But if you do that, it is now equally responsibility to circle back as things have cooled down with the why and the reason and those things. Because at the end of the day, we've all played for, worked for, been around coaches or leaders. They got no problem with like what I call like the drive-by shooting. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It was random. We don't know why it happened. Coach is just on one today. Don't worry, bud. That's just how he is. And guys will miss the moment, right? To me, there's got to be purpose and tact behind it. So, like, if it's a kid that I really we got to get on like that, you got to go back on the back end and hey, do you know why that happened? And oftentimes, when it's cooled down, the kid usually gets it. Like, yeah, I was
Yep.
bullshitting, or I was this or that or whatever, And you got to have those conversations. And a lot of times, it's those moments that kid's like, man, coach actually really gives a shit about me, because he could have just let
Right.
that go,
Yep.
And that's a big thing for young coaches. Everything's got to be this, ultra intense, over the top maniac all the time. And like for a lot of guys, that's what turns them off. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
you got to look at the households they came from,
Yep.
their experiences with male role models in their life. You know what I mean? And like, so like you got to build the relationship first. You got to build the trust first. And once you have that, you can be as hard on a kid and have as high of a standard as you possibly want for them, because ultimately that is what they want. And where my job becomes like that is in the days when they can't quite get to that point, that edge on their own. That's where it's my job to help get them there. And if they can consistently do that over the course of their career, on the days they can do it on their own, and the days they need me to do it for them, ultimately they can get where they want to go in the end. And then when you're handling guys like that, the rest of your roster sees that, and they'll see how you coach guys. They'll see how you interact with guys. And you may be, through my interactions with you, I may be building trust with that guy over there because he sees how our interactions are working, and that helps with the overall buy-in and belief and stuff in your program. I try to coach our guys here the same way I would want my son coached, right? That's fine. Coach them hard, hold them to a high standard. But like, I'm not one of those guys that sit here and dog cuss my guys and call them every name in the book or whatever. Most time, like, my role really and truly to be effective, you're more of a teacher. Like, if you have a kid that sucks at something or is doing bad at something, trust me, it's not because he wants to. He probably doesn't know any better at this point, right? He doesn't understand what the temperature needs to be on this day, or he doesn't understand what the intent of this drill or this lift or this movement may be. It's my job to be able to teach him that. Well, if he's been taught that and he understands that and has shown he can execute it, then the times he's not, that's coaching to get that to where he will, right?
Yeah.
But lots of times you can try to get on a guy like that, but like, the kid doesn't even know. I've seen it before, at practices, coach gets on a kid and like, you'll ask them afterwards, like, hey, do you know why that happened? No. Big eyes, because they just got their ass chewed or something. It's like, this is why. And they're like, oh, okay. And then they can fix it. You can't fix something you don't understand, right? So it's our job. I always tell my guys, like, we're essentially teachers, right? We have a very different classroom than most, but at the end of the day, we're teachers and educators, right? And then aside from that, like, talking about the time from coach and how things come down from the top, like, coach has a very specific vision for this program of how it's going to look, how it's going to operate, all those things. So one, it takes teamwork between all the different departments to make that happen. But then also, because I do get the kids year round, I get so much time with these guys. It's my job to be basically, outside of him, the number one conveyor of our culture and our way and our standard, because I get the most opportunity to teach it.
Yeah, man, again, so many things there. You go back to the relationships, the connections with the kids, and you understanding they probably just don't even know, and that's different than being lazy. Because if you don't know, you can't really say it's lazy. Just go back to like, okay, well, if they don't know what to do, then you have to train them, right? And then once you've trained them and they still don't know, then you got to look back at yourself and go, man, I didn't do a very good job training them, I guess. So you take that responsibility and you train them again, and then you check in a little harder to make sure that they've got it. And once they've nodded their head, or once you've done the training, you have to make some decisions like, okay, is this kid on the bus or is he not on the bus? And is he capable or is he not capable? Because those are two different things too. Like, if he's capable and not on the bus, all right, well, maybe he needs a little bit more motivation somehow, like external, internal, something like that. But if he's not on the bus and he's capable, that's even a different conversation. Or excuse me, capable and not on the bus, or on the bus and not capable. Those are other tougher conversations, or things that you've got to I think what I picked up there is like, you have your finger on the pulse all the time, because you're getting these touches with these kids, and it has to be communicated up the chain to help them. Your team of coaches keep their finger on the pulse. And I think this is just leadership. It's business organization. It's business management. It's team management 101. And I look out there, I talk to a lot of coaches that coach a lot of different things, whether that be in sport, in the gym, on the firearms range, in business, and whatever else. And at the end of the day, I think the number one skill that you ultimately can, beyond all the knowledge that you might have and whatever else, is how to connect with the people that are in front of you in the way that makes the most sense to be the most productive. And some of us, we want to be yelled at. I got to tell you, some of those conversations you just described, like just coach just coming in on me super hard. If I hadn't had that, I don't know where I'd be. Right. And then there were other times where I watch coaches absolutely just destroy a kid, and just know that kid just wasn't getting anything out of that whatsoever. Even as a kid, I could see it, like, you're just destroying this guy. He's not getting it. And then what does that do? What have you accomplished, at the end of the day?
And that comes down, like, you got to know and understand your kids. Like, I have some, some guys, on this team, other team, whatever, like if you try to like challenge them publicly, they're going to wall it off. They're going to try to protect their ego. They're not going to hear it. They're not going to do those things. They're trying to protect themselves in front of their peers, right? But that same guy, oftentimes, if you go pull him aside, have an arm around him, you can probably have an even harder conversation with him and challenge him to a higher degree, and they will be receptive to it. Now, there's some guys that will only respond to that to the public stuff, and that's where you got to know your kids, And typically, I always start with let me have this conversation with you before I have it with we. Right? Because for most guys, it's probably going to fall in the individual category first. Or if that first interaction with the guy is a negative one, you may have a lot harder road ahead of you rebuilding that relationship back up. So I always try to aim before I shoot. Right? And that's probably the biggest thing I've learned as I've gotten older in this career, because I used to be really, really good at shooting before I'd aim. And there's times when I was extremely wrong and felt like a huge piece of shit for things I said and things I did, because I didn't know the situation the kid was going through at that time. Whereas if I'd maybe went about it the other way, it could have been much more productive. It could have been a far more prosperous situation to be in, but made the mistake like a lot of young coaches do and pulled the trigger long before I ever looked at the scope.
And I think that's a metaphor for a lot of things going on in society today. If we just took a step back for a second and got focused for a minute and really tried to understand and develop what it was we were trying to get across and the reasons why, like, people would be a lot more receptive. We'd have there'd be a lot less division. And I think there'd be a lot more acceptance to, at the very least, like you were mentioning, this having the conversation in whatever way possible.
Well, even just the acknowledgement of the fact that we don't all know what the other guy is going through. Everybody's going through stuff, right? And so, like, you got no idea what, especially like our kids, man, like, from every background you can imagine, good, bad, otherwise, with school, with all the external pressure, with the pressure of being Division I, the college athlete, expectations of family or friends or just the general public, social media, all those things. Like, these guys' plates are full, and there is a lot of stress from a lot of different directions coming at these guys. So on any given day, you don't quite know what that guy may have went through just that morning, or you know what I mean? And so that's why, like, the relationships, those kids can feel open to come to you about stuff, or when you got to come to them on something, knowing how to go about it. Because more often than not, most of these kids, man, they want to do right. They want to do good. They want to be successful. And sometimes, like, they got things in their life that are getting in the way of that. And so it's on me to try to figure that out and try to put them in the best situation. One, maybe learn how to deal with that other stuff, or maybe how to cut out some of the other stuff, and then how to stay on the path that ultimately they all truly do aspire to be on.
Yeah, I think that's the best coaches understand that. And you're working with young men in their formable years you mentioned it, coming from all different types of backgrounds and whatever. And we see that stuff, manifest into poor behavior, bad decisions, and it winds up in the news. I guess basically what you're describing is all the things that you guys end up having to do to keep them out of those situations, or at least teach them how to make better decisions. And I don't think there's a lot of credit given to, coaches doing what you're doing in that way. So, I mean, you're on top of that, you're also trying to be a performance-based coach, right? And so there's the programming piece, and there's all the things that go into this. And that's where I want to take a little bit of a turn and kind of get into some of the nuts and bolts of coaching, strength and conditioning, and kind of how you handle stuff. So I'm gonna come like outright and get in with some deep questions that I think people outside may not be able to relate to right away, but as we go down the path, they can start to apply these same questions to their own training, what they're doing, like from a physical training perspective, what they're doing on the range, what they're maybe doing with their nutrition, with their life for that matter. But so the first one I'm going to ask is just like, how do you link physical capacity with skill? Specific to any of the testing, like movement testing that you're doing, how do you guys go about doing this? Like, is there a method? Is it standardized? What do you do?
I always go back to like when it comes to like your like kind of like programming and say like what we're doing in the gym or what we're doing in field work. Ultimately, what job am I training that guy to go do? And does the training look like the job he is supposed to go do? And if it doesn't, then why am I doing it? Right? Am I doing it because I can say, oh, we test this and these guys all got better at this? Okay, does it relate to their job? No, not at all. Well, then why are we doing that, right?
So stupid.
and so for me, it's trying to boil it down and keep it as efficient and streamlined as possible to get them ready to go do the job that they have to go do. And you're going to look at some performance metrics and stuff along the way. But like we all know, like strength isn't linear, performance isn't linear. It's going to follow trends. There's going to be waves. There's going to be highs and lows and all those things. And so it's looking at trends and progression and those types of things. But like I said, the big thing is like it's training, nutrition, all of it. You can make it as confusing and overwhelming as you want. It doesn't mean it has to be that way, right? And even how we progress guys through the program and like the movements that we select for them and the program that they're in, just because you can doesn't mean you should or that you need to either. My mom's, 67 years old. Well, can she put chains on a bar and squat it? Probably. Is that what she needs? No, right? And it's just like, we'll get kids who'll come in out of a high school program. Like, oh yeah, we do bands and chains in my high school. I'm like, I could probably put my paycheck on it. This kid's squat sucks to begin with, right? And so
they want to do all the sexy stuff.
Yeah. And so like, what we do, like a lot of what we do, especially a lot is very, very basic, but like, you got to build that foundation, right? And then that foundation has to lend itself towards what is the goal? What's this kid's job? Am I looking at an O lineman? Am I looking at a DB? What are we looking at here? And what's to be expected of him on the field, right? So then whatever in our drills and our field work and our metabolic conditioning, is that meeting the demands that he needs to go do his job and perform at a high level? And what's interesting for me, because there's so much technology out there now, right? And it's all interesting. It's also not all actionable either, right? So you got to have a pretty good filter as to what technology do you want to employ, what metrics are you really going to look at that you can affect that also have impact on the job they're going to do. And so we got to keep an eye on those things. And then for me, like I was coaching for a hell of a long time before GPS was even a word used for performance, right? And so I have a lot of things like anecdotally over the years. Well, we did this and it worked. Okay.
Yep.
Well, now if we're still doing some of the same things, do the numbers and do the data actually reflect
Does it really?
that this works, right? And as we get a lot of older coaches my age that get somewhat intimidated by the technology, because I think a lot of guys are worried that it's going to say you're wrong, right? And in most cases, what it tells you, if you've been doing a good job, like, hey, you're pretty close. You know what I mean? A couple tweaks in volume here, or a couple tweaks in your speeds there, and like now you're meeting practice demands. Now you're meeting position demands, and so that's helped us a ton the last few years as we went deeper down that road of really evaluating what we're doing via the technology. And my guy says all the time, like, we're never going to be a data directed program, but we'll be a data informed program. And because at the end of the day, you might look at workloads and this and that. Like, should we cut back? Should we push harder? Well, the numbers say this. Okay, well, the numbers only a piece of the pie, right? You still then they have to trust your coach's eye and what a team needs to be prepared to go play and go perform at a high level. So you want the information from the data, but ultimately you still have to make a real time decision on what that's going to look like as far as the practice plan or training plan or any of those things.
Yeah, this is the human part of human performance. Right. Again, you can have all the data in the world. Now, what do you do with it? Because everybody's an individual, and it's very dependent on what's the outcome that we're looking for here. But more importantly, who are we dealing with? Like, what are the individual, things about this person that will, dictate how we apply whatever the training modality, whatever the data, whatever the performance metric is. So, I have a couple questions, and I want to come back to the tech. But so you mentioned again, position players, what is it that we're doing? Why are we doing it? What's the outcome we're looking for here? And does it work or not? Right. Again, coming back to the data in a sec, can you talk about the nuance between how that looks, or the things that you're looking at, what that application might look like between, say, like a newer, younger athlete coming in to the veteran athlete? And you mentioned a little something earlier about how you manage the training day, and certain guys that may not be taking more snaps, that may be doing less weight training, right, or conditioning in the weight room, versus the guys that are taking less snaps, might be spending more time there as kind of a leading. Can you talk a little bit about how you manage the different groups?
Yeah, we always look at, when guys are coming in, like, it's regardless of what kind of high school program they came out of, we're going to kind of start in one basic spot and teach them like our way and the foundational way, right? And you may have squatted in high school. Maybe the cues that we use in squat are slightly different, or maybe our standard of depth is different, or the way we catch clean, or whatever. Not maybe, so we get guys on the board to do it our way, right? And so, like, with the strength of progression, kind of go back to some of the Chris Carlisle said a long time ago, but like, you have like the three hows of strength and development, right? First it's how do you do the movement in the first place, right? Well, once you've checked that box and that proficiency is there, then it's, well, how strong can we get at that movement? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you creep to the end of that, when you're getting closer to like, your capabilities, then it becomes how fast. How explosively can we move that? How explosively can we move that same weight? And to get that transfer over to the field, because you might get it. We had a old lineman this last winter that squat 675. Okay, now listen, could I program it out to get him to squat 700 next year? Probably. Obviously there's more risk involved. You're that strong because a strain becomes a snap, right? But would that extra 25 pounds really make him a better football player? Highly unlikely, right? He's already strong to play this game at any level. But if I can help that guy be able to move better, if I can help that guy to be more explosive, well, will that make him a better player? There's a lot better chance of that helping him than another 25 pounds on his squat. Now, on the other end of that, I get a young freshman lineman in here who could barely squat his body weight, and it's not very good technique. Well, that guy definitely has to get stronger. He definitely has to get more technically proficient. He needs to spend more time in the how and the how strong before he ever worries about the how fast. And we'll still try to sprinkle still some of those components in there. So like with those young guys, I'm looking at how and how strong. There'll still be a little bit of how fast here and there as they start to learn force development and those types of things. But, it might be, I'm just throwing arbitrary numbers out, but that might be 5% of what he's doing. Whereas like that guy that's at the peak end of it, who like the how is long and done, and he's got that, and he's first maxed out the how strong. Am I still going to push that guy for strength? Of course I am, right? But maybe not to the same degree. He's going to be much more focused on the speed and the velocity of the movement, as opposed to just how much weight can I possibly get on the bar. Limit strength matters. This is always going to be a game meant for big, strong, physical men. But when you get to a certain point, you are now a big enough, strong enough, physical enough man to go play this game. Okay, what else can I provide for you at this point?
Yeah, this comes back to, man, that was awesome, because I just recently having this conversation with a couple of other human performance guys that have crossed over from the world of athletics. Actually, one guy came out of Memphis, as a matter of fact, and has now moved into applying strength conditioning and human performance as relates to the shooting game. And we were talking about this very thing, and kind of like, what are say, if we looked at the domains of fitness, if you want to call them that, strength, power, balance, agility, speed, all that kind of stuff, we start to line it up, like, what is important? Like, and then what do you think is the most important thing for you as a football player who plays defensive back, whatever, or you as the SWAT officer, or whatever it is your profession or your game is that you're playing? What is it that you think is important, the most important? What are those things? And then what actually are you training? Right?
Yeah.
Because most people tend to gravitate to what they that what they're really good at. Like if you're a strength athlete and you're just strong as hell, you're the strongest guy in the gym, you always try to kind of maintain that, and you'll just gravitate to the things that you're good at versus like
Yep.
what are the things you're not good at, and why aren't you training that way? More importantly, I think the question becomes is why aren't you doing that? And I think you just went back to like the Chris Carlisle thing. They don't understand how. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing, and they're seeing like an end product, or they're seeing a professional athlete or a veteran athlete doing something that seems very sexy. There's a lot of sizzle to it. It is the stuff where you want to grab a popcorn in a chair and watch this athlete express this strength, express this power and this athleticism. But you're forgetting that what they've done is they've mastered a high level of fundamentals and skill. So fundamentals, then skills building, and then putting that all on top of one another. And part of the skill is learning when and how much, and obviously with a deep understanding of the why. I only bring that up because I think it crosses over so many things. And I see, again, for people that are training in the gym, whether you're a D1 football player or not, these principles do not change. They should still be applied in the game of life. Look, if your goal is to max, deadlift whatever off the platform, then you're going to have to do deadlifts, right? And you're going to have to do a lot of them, and that's going to be a huge focus. But if that's not what you're doing, or if that's not your goal, why are you putting so much stock in that one movement? And by doing that, what are you potentially taking away from all the other things that you should be gaining from the time and efficiency in the gym?
Right. And like what you said, that just goes back to like, what job are you training to go do? You know what I mean? Like I can take my guys here and, make them whatever, bigger, stronger, more athletic, those things. And you might have a guy on the other side thing, whatever they said, SWAT community, special operations community, that sees that. Well, that might not be what that guy needs to do, because his job is very different than my guy's job. Are there some components that cross over? Absolutely, there probably are. But you can't just take what works for one area and be like, oh, that's what's good here too. And that goes back to that, to the how, and then knowing what you need and when you need it. And that part's huge. And it's just be able to evaluate what is the task that needs to be accomplished. Okay, what are the tools that you need to develop to accomplish that task at a high level? Okay, so then what's the best way in training to develop those tools that you need to go complete that task?
Yeah, and that, again, with understanding the concepts of individuality, specificity, progressive overload, it just, again, these are very basic things, and I think they get so convoluted.
Training age. Yeah. Training age of that is huge too. That's a giant indicator of what it is too.
Yeah, you got guys that are, my age, nearing 50, that are trying to do what they were doing when they were 25, wondering why they're hurting all the time, or they're not getting the result that they're looking for. There's a lot of reasons why, and if you're just reaching back to what worked for you before, because it worked for me then, you mentioned this before, like why did it work for you then? And are you sure that it actually worked, or were you just in a much different situation metabolically, physiologically, all those things, in order to make anything that you did at that time probably somewhat beneficial as it related to your fitness, and maybe you got a little lucky and got some cool results. Because the meathead work approach is, it works until it doesn't, and we talk about that stuff on the show all the time. Let's circle back to the is it working, and and why is it working with regard to the tech. And you kind of brought that up before, and all the gadgets that exist out there, and so forth. Like, what, if any, technology are you using? Again, you're probably exposed. I'm sure Florida State gets hit up all the time, like, hey, check out our new gadget, use it for free, give us your feedback in terms of their product development and obviously the marketing of that product. But what are the basic things that you use in your job on a daily basis from a tech perspective that are valuable?
So, my one thing with tech is like, I mean, this is an old school view of it, but I don't ever want to be so reliant on technology that if I show up to work tomorrow and the power's out in the building, that I can no longer run my program. You know what I'm saying? And so that being said, what we do use technology-wise, as far as like tracking like bar speed and velocity, I still use the Tendo unit. I know there's a ton of other options out there to do it that are more technically advanced than that. I still like the Tendo unit. It's simple, but then like we'll track that. Like, will we do some true like VBT training? We will. A lot of times I look at during the season though, I look at like more like global trends. So like it might be
Okay.
our top single and squat on a Sunday, right? And I'll kind of see what that moves at that percentage across the board for the team. And if I'm looking at all those numbers, I'm like, man, they're moving that weight good. Well, that makes me feel comfortable in the progression that I wrote of what next week's going to look like.
Mhm.
If I catch a week, I'm like, whoa, we were slow today. This should not be this slow. Well, now I got to look like, okay, why did that happen? What do I need to do to intervene to be able to right the ship, right? But if I don't have that information, you just take next week's jump and you keep going. You keep digging those guys in a deeper hole throughout the season, right?
Squats, cleans, deadlift. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I might have to look at that and be like, hey, we gotta maybe take a look at our volume or take a look at our loadings. But more often than not, you look at it like, yep, those guys are moving good. That's a speed, or maybe even exceeds my expectations of how fast they're going to move that this week. We're in a great spot going into the next week to follow our progression. So even though I program it out well in advance, well ahead of time, I always know there's the opportunity to change as you go. One of the biggest things Mark Phillippi taught me at UNLV when it comes to programming is like, he goes, don't ever get too caught up in thinking this is just a science. It is just as much an art as it is a science. Do you have to know the science? Yes. But you also better be a little bit of an artist with it too if you really want to have that program be effective. The other thing we use the NORD board quite a bit.
Okay.
So it's like Nordic hamstring test, telling me force left or right on the hamstring. And that's another good one for me because once again, like that, it's a simple test. It's a movement we do with the program anyways, at a very frequent basis. And, I can take a look, like our guys' numbers trending up or they're trending down. Well, if they're trending down, is it fatigue? Is it overtraining? Is it injury? What is it? Or, I can look at the balance in left and right. This guy's always pretty symmetrical. Also, now there's a, 5% difference. That's still okay. But what if that 5 becomes 10, becomes 15, becomes 20? Well, there's something going on. And that same kid, I may be like, hey, how do you feel? I feel good. I feel great. You look at his speeds of practice. He's still running fast. But like, that's a huge red flag. There's something going on. Now, it might be as simple as the guy's hips are out of alignment and needs to get reset, right? Or you may have something else going on. So like if we can try to like intervene in that training with some more single leg stuff, check it out, try to dig a little bit deeper, then maybe we can, you can never prevent injury, right?
Yeah.
But there's times where there might be a red flag that maybe we can intervene before something small becomes something bigger, right? So we use that quite a bit. And then at practice, obviously we use Catapult GPS with all of our guys. Well, not all of our guys in practice, with about 70% of our roster at practice, we use Catapult GPS.
Okay.
And so then, we look at like our standard practice metrics and how we want to break that down. We kind of have our broad kind of lighthouse metrics that we'll kind of evaluate practice with and global stuff. And then Jackson kind of takes the more laser pointer approach into specific guys, into more specific metrics from guy to guy, depending on what he's working on or what he's going through. And that just goes to show of like, trust me, I'm not a sports scientist, right? Like, the biggest thing when I hired him, I told him, like, I understand training, right? What I need you to do is if you can identify problems or issues or questions or scenarios within that the data is showing you, bring me those and then let me figure out how to solve those problems. And like, that's where I enjoy the technology, right? And so those are our main pieces. We got a lot of other smaller stuff that we'll do, but those are our main, like, bread and butter, heavy hitter stuff that we lean on.
Yeah, I think for a lot of strength and conditioning coaches, that what you just said there makes a lot of sense. Obviously when you're looking at speed, like, or velocity based training, and then the NORD board, and the hamstrings being like that weak link. Just sort of, that's the one that takes kids out, or whatever. And I've heard this before. I actually hear this from a lot of strength coaches, that they've adopted that same type of approach with the hamstring or the NORD board. Sorry, I keep saying hamstring, but the NORD board technology, to keep an eye on things. And what they've said is, metrically, they can measure the fact that they've been using that as part of their training program, and they do focus on that from a conditioning perspective. They have less hamstring injuries. They have less low back injuries as well. And so, it'll take some time, I'm sure, with like what's the term I'm looking for like, where the aggregation of all this data across all these coaches that will ultimately share it somehow, or NORD the Nord system's got it like stored somewhere and
Yeah.
it's going to
Yep.
get released or whatever. But I'm sure it will all come out, and then it will make much more sense to everybody. But can you just for a second, like the GPS stuff, just for those people that are a little unfamiliar with it, can you kind of give an overview on how you use that and what that actually means? Because I think a lot of basically civilians use this, right? Or people that aren't competing in sports, they're using GPS technology at some level. They just don't understand necessarily the value in it or how it really works outside of, I ran this far today or I did this many steps or whatever.
Yeah. Yep. And so for us with the Catapult GPS, for in shoulder pads, it's just a small unit that goes in between the shoulder pads, or if we're not in pads, it kind of has like a sports bra looking tank top that it goes into kind of right over the seventh cervical vertebrae. And so, and it's going to track thousands of points of data, and you can get into the weeds super deep on it. So where you need where that comes into, what are you really going to look at? What's actionable? What tells the most about your deal? And like, it might be from sport to sport, you may look at totally different metrics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we have what we look at. We'll take a look at like our, obviously, max velocity is always the cool one. Like, how fast did that guy run on that play? Like that's like the cool stuff to look at. That's stuff the kids like to look at. But even in football, a lot of times that's just a function of opportunity, right? I mean, if I'm a wide receiver, I may not have to hit 22.5 miles an hour to catch this pass and score this touchdown. You know what I mean?
That is a great point. Yeah, that is a great point, because I think when people look at metrics and data like that and they're trying to compare and they're going all the time, everything is about like, well, what did the clock say? What did the timer say? What did what's that measurement say? But there's all these other variables that come into play. So what does that really mean? I think that's a really important point to make, man.
Yeah, and it does. It's all relative based on the situation, and then so like I said, that part's cool to look at. We look at player load is kind of like Catapult's like arbitrary metric of like a basically a unit of measurement of work, and so we use that to a certain degree because it's an easy number to throw out, like what was high, what was low. But even in the nature a guy moves, I could have two guys do the exact same. Say this is a practice, say it's training, right? I could have the same two different guys do the same workout and have drastically different player load numbers, because one guy's maybe a better, more efficient mover than the other guy, or one guy's maybe more of an abrupt accelerator or decelerator. So the numbers can get a little bit different to that too. But it does give you a decent global overview of how much work was done in this session today, right? And then we'll look at our explosive movements, our changes of direction, to kind of see how efficiently the guys are moving, how intense was the practice and whatnot. And so we keep it boiled down pretty narrow, because as much as it tracks, you can't chase everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got to keep it to what can you manage, what do you understand, and then what can you actively affect.
So I wonder what your thoughts are on like the person that loves gadgetry, like that loves technology and is just training themselves. They're not a NC2A athlete. They're not a professional athlete or whatever. But maybe they are professional, and being somewhat of an athlete is important, right? For maintaining their performance and health in their career. What are your thoughts on these guys getting into programming, and then maybe getting gadgets and trying to manage all this stuff on their own as a professional in whatever it is that they do that isn't an athlete? And by the way, we could talk about athletes too, because I think what you just articulated was these guys, like this kid's job is to run routes and catch footballs and score touchdowns, as well as being a student athlete, right? Like, how much of that stuff do you want him worrying about or even sharing it with him is compared to what he needs to be doing on the field and thinking about on a daily basis?
It's kind of individual. We got some of our guys who are very interested in it. Like, hey, what were my numbers today? Hey, I hit this play at practice. How fast did I run? Or what was my Northboard test? Oh, that's better than it was last time, or whatever. And then some guys truly don't care at all, and that's fine too. I don't need them to care about it. You know what I mean? I just need them to go when it's time to go, and then we can manage on the back end of how much or how not much they're going.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the individual goes, your guy that is not a professional athlete but takes his training serious. Maybe he's a garage gym guy or whatever, but takes his training seriously. Like, by all means, like educate yourself on it, understand it, find out what works for you in that technology, and then also just like we do as a program, be data informed, don't be data driven. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's just keeping an eye on those things. And it's keeping, like, I think for most guys, I think probably for, a lot of just, what I won't call it recreation, because we all take it more serious than recreation. But for, you're a lifter with nothing on the line other than you like to push yourself and you want to train hard. I think some of the velocity stuff is a good place to start to kind of see what velocities you're moving weights at. If you're supposed to hit this at 90%, well, is your 90% really moving like 90% should move? Maybe your 90 isn't 90 anymore. Maybe that's your new 85, or maybe today you moved 90 like it was 100%. Well, that might give you a little sign that maybe you need to back off. Maybe you're doing too much, So I think there's nothing necessarily, wrong with it. Just got to, it's another way to monitor and progress your own training.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge people, wind themselves up in is so many people are reaching out there like they really do care. They really want to perform well in whatever it is that they're doing, whether it's, some game on the court, on the field, on the mat, or just in the game of life. They do really want to perform. They want to make sure they're doing the right things, and there's so much information out there, right? And there's no shortage of people wanting to sell that information to them in the form of whatever, infotainment or even programming. And I find people, again, let's just go back to like, what are you choosing and why are you choosing it? And so, I think that's where people get into trouble because they don't have a really strong developed why. And even if they do, they really don't know where to take it from there. Like, okay, what's the underlying thing to this? Like, what am I lacking? Like, how do I do an assessment? How do I understand like where my strengths and weaknesses are? I get like, I can't run out and run 5 miles without feeling like I'm going to die. All right, so maybe your endurance, can improve. But it's then they're picking and choosing these programs maybe based on what looks good, who's selling it to them. That's a tough thing for me to look at as a coach because I think people get themselves, into some not so great situations. And if you're going to make the investment and you're going to spend the time and put the effort and the energy and you really do care that much, I find that's a tough one for me to swallow. I'm like, oh man, like, I don't know if that's the right program for you. I'm glad you're doing something, right? And you may be in quote unquote great shape, but that's a little tough. I'm not really sure that's appropriate for you. Do you have advice for people in terms of like where to start or how to think about that a little bit differently?
Yeah, I think one, you can never go wrong with the basics. There's a reason the basics are the basics because they have worked forever and they will continue to work forever. I think when you're looking at coaching and programming, like, who is it coming from? Who is your source? Who are they working with? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And if the population they're working with and they're showing success to that population and that population is what you associate with and what you're trying to be, that's where you want to go. It's just like whatever. If you had someone who, I want to be the best pickleball player in my neighborhood, I'm probably not the guy to come from to give you programming for that, right? Find someone who's doing that. Because like I said, it goes back. What job are you trying to go do? Okay, well then do what looks like the job, what will get you ready for the job. And you got to have a good filter with that, And I think too, it's easy to get caught up, especially with social media and stuff. Like, you can look at guys, whatever, NFL player, just because, my world's always be centered to football. Guys standing on Bosu balls and catching hecko sticks with blindfold on and all this wild stuff. But it's like, and people are like, oh, that's how that guy got ready to go be who he is. No, that's just what was chosen to be posted. That guy's mastered the basics for years and years and years. Mm-hmm. And what they posted might be the 5 minutes of stuff he did that's just interesting and keeps him engaged because that guy's been squatting and cleaning and sprinting for his entire competitive life. And like, that's not what's interesting to post, right? So you're going to post maybe some of the fluff stuff, some of the interesting stuff, some of the out there things. And I think a lot of people will see that and they just think, oh, that's the foundation. That's the how. That's what got him there. No, it's the other 95% of stuff that was boring and not sexy that didn't get posted. It is probably what got them there in the first place. And I think most people too also make the mistake of thinking they're way more advanced than they really are, which is why you got to start with the basics and they're going to work. And when you get to the point where the basics no longer work, which shit, I'm 45, I'm still not there either, that's when you can start to branch out into some of the other stuff that keeps you engaged. But I think I think the source is the most important thing. Is that coach working with people like you that are achieving at a high level the things you would like to achieve at a high level at? Okay, well, if those populations match up, then that might be the coach for you. If they're doing something completely different, you just like what they post, you like their motivation, their personality, but you're talking about two different worlds, that's probably not going to be the best fit for you.
Yeah, I see it. Like, I think I mean, you sort of articulated that at the beginning, like you prepared way more to play on the field than you actually took snaps or took plays on the field. And so I think a lot of people, and the reason I say that and bring that up is because this is what you spent the majority of your time doing. And then obviously you've had a long career over 20 years doing this. And you are working with the elite of the elite at the level that you're working with them at. And I think there's a big difference between what you just said and what people see as like the pro athlete who's selling them programming, right? Like not the guy who spent the years training the pro athlete to be the pro athlete, right? That he was by helping him express his talents and his skills and his genetic potential and all those other things. But they're buying it from the guy that looks good, that maybe plays the game currently or played the game very recent, in a very recent time. That's a challenge, I think, across the consumer side of things when it comes to purchasing training programs. And look, that's not to say those people didn't have tremendous success or what, there's some good in what it is that they're producing. But I think when you talk to coaches and you really start to get down to the nitty gritty on things, all the good ones, all the ones that have 20 years in the business and successful careers at that, are saying the same things that you're saying right now. And I know that can be really tough for people, again, in the age of instant, gratification and social media and whatever else. But this is the message that I hope to get more of out there. And so the follow-up question to this is for the parents, particularly with the kids. And you're a guy that sees where a lot of parents dream alongside their kids as they're dreaming of getting to, right? Which is, look, if you go to Florida State, there's a good chance you could have a shot at the NFL. However, the percentage is still very, very small. But my point of this is like they're looking at that as like that is the next achievable goal. And they're purchasing or buying into something that they think gives them an edge up or a leg up to getting there. What advice do you have for the parents out there of young athletes in terms of their training programs and what they do to help their kids advance, along the way?
Yeah, I think with the kids stuff and the youth training, it goes back to like it better look like basic fundamental athletic movements, right? Teaching kids to run properly, teaching kids to jump and land properly, and like once again, it doesn't need to be fancy. And like if it's coming from someone like I said, you gotta look at the source, right? Like there are super freaks out there that were ultra successful in spite of what they did training wise.
Mm-hmm.
And like for a lot of people, and I'm gonna say us, but trust me, I'm not one of those people. But for a lot of us, like it's really hard to admit that maybe you were just born on third base. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like God gave you every gift, and all you had to do was just go act it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have people who that's not the case, and they have to work and grind and develop to ever even try to achieve that point. But that same person who's born third base wants to think and wants to feel that like, no, I did this through my hard work. I did this through my training. I did this through my lifestyle, through my diet. But we know damn well there's some guys out there, some athletes out there, like they were able to achieve what they achieved, whether it be championships or gold medals, in spite of what they did simply because of who they were.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of times, those are the same people who are going to sell programming and do what I did because look what I got doing what I did. Well, what you got was some pretty incredible genetics from choosing the two perfect parents to breed this freak that was able to do the things you could do. Mm-hmm. And trust me, that's awesome. And I'm by no means not jealous of that, right? But like sometimes you got to look, you might need to look at the person who overachieved for what they were given. Because there's probably, in that case, it probably was more related to their mindset, was more related to their training, to their work, because they didn't have all those gifts to go achieve the great things that they achieved. And you see that all the time, and and that kind of addressed that part of it. But getting back to the kid stuff, man, kid stuff's got to be basic. You got to teach them to be, develop relative strength, be able to control and coordinate their own body. It's not about with those kids like, let's get them lifting, let's get a barbell in their hands. Man, there's a lot of stuff they got to do before that point. Now, if they've done that stuff at a young age, they can progress to that barbell at a younger age because they are proficient in all the other things, then cool, you can do that. It's a very individualized deal. You get some kids who are 12 years old that have beautiful power clean form that can clean. They can kind of start progressing to clean. You got some athletes who are 20 that still can't progress and clean like that because they've just never been exposed to it. And so it's got to be individual. Like, what does that athlete need at that age? And most young kids, when they haven't been exposed to stuff, Can their body, just their own body weight, go through a squat pattern? Can they do a
Mm.
lunge? Can they jump? Can they land? Can they sprint? And if you can get those things better, you're building relative strengths and building athletic abilities that can then transition into whatever that sport is. And, you'll see it every, we get so many parents who want their kid to specialize in a sport at such a young age. But like, the thing is, training's general, right?
Mhm.
The same basic, strength and power and coordination and explosiveness and all those things, like, that's going to apply to any sport, right? And especially the younger they are, the more general it needs to be. And so if you have young kids that are going and they're in a really sport specific program, man, they're probably missing a lot of the bases that it takes to actually develop to what they are aspiring to go be.
Yeah, I think, and just because they can do it doesn't mean they should be doing it. I mean, strapping a parachute to a 6-year-old, who can't control his own body weight up and down, or doesn't know how to fall down and land and get back up. I mean, that again, it might look sexy, and the kid might think it looks cool or whatever because he saw it on YouTube and he saw his favorite athlete training like that. But so refreshing to hear you say. And again, I didn't expect you to say anything different than that. I think what I wanted to hear is what you said, so that other parents hear this, and that that it it's the same for the kids as it is for the adults. It's all based and rooted in fundamentals. And I think there's another piece to this, and that is like, for the kids, don't forget, it should be fun for them. I mean, this is a time in their life where it should be fun. Now, this is a great time to teach work
No
ethic.
doubt.
It's a great time to teach intestinal fortitude and some character builders along the way. Like, I again, I wouldn't be here in my life without some coaches that help me do that. But yeah, from a fundamentals perspective, I think people can obviously very, very easily get lost in that. And so I think, just wrapping it back up to hey, look at who is giving your kid this instruction. Who are they? Where are they getting their information from? And lastly, how is it being delivered? I think one of the things I see is, you have a very tough job, but you're in the sense that you have a lot of moving pieces. There are a lot of individuals. There's a lot of positions. There's a lot of things, right? And you have to manage this group, and you have a whole team around you in order to manage that. A lot of times when you go into these situations, particularly for the kids and for adults for that matter, what you have is a person who's trying to be really efficient with their time and packs 20 kids into a class. Well, that's 20 individuals with 20 different skill levels, with 20 different levels of ability, endurance, strength, all coordination, all of those things. And, even if they're all the same age, same height, whatever else, those are all different kids, and not every kid should be doing the same thing. And so, look at the value of what you're getting for what you're paying. And that's, that ends up getting a little bit skewed to, if you walk into your strength and conditioning room, people are, again, there's different skill levels, but we're talking about a more mature kid. But like you said, you got a 20-year-old that still can't really clean very well. Well, that kid needs a different training program today than the 20-year-old that's standing next to him who cleans really well, plays the same position, right? I mean, we're doing two different things to accomplish similar goals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the biggest mistakes people make, like two things, one for here and one for the kids. For all those parents that want their kids to whatever, I want my kid to play Major League Baseball someday, and it's like, let them fall in love with it first. You know what I mean? Like, I look at like training. Like, do I want that to be a huge part of my son's life? Trust me, of course I do. I'm not going to make him fall in love with it if I force it down his throat. So like when I usually try to save at least one session a week to be able to train at home in the garage. And when my son was younger, when dad's in the garage training, he wanted to go nowhere near it. It's loud. There's a lot of stuff going on. I'm staying away. And, then it kind of became like he'd poke his head out there and kind of just see what's going on. And then it kind of became like, well, I'll come hang out while dad trains. And then it became like, hey, what can I do today? Okay, well, let's do this and we'll do that. Just some real basic stuff. And the next time, if he doesn't want to do it, that's fine. But like, as long as he keeps coming back and like I let him kind of choose his level of involvement, because I think if you can plant the seed like that, you have a better chance of falling in love with it, making it part of your life, whether that be a sport, or whether that be training, whether that be whatever it may be, right? And then also I think like on our end of stuff, even though we're at Florida State, we're trained Division I athletes and guys that have NFL hopes and dreams, like, you can't ever make the mistake of thinking that these guys are all like these physical freaks that are capable of this wild stuff, right? What I have is I have a group of really, really guys who are very talented at the game of football, because football is a skill. Physical traits can enhance how well you can execute that skill, but it's still a skill, right? And that's what go back to, like, all of a sudden my guys who are some of our best players, or potentially the guys who become some of our best players, who might be some of the worst lifters we have, who are not strong yet, who are not familiar with it yet. And like I said, that's where my job comes in to be able to build those quality and close those gaps, because ultimately that'll make that guy better. But I think one of the biggest from the outside misconceptions people have is like, oh, I bet every guy benches 405. I bet. I'm like, no, it's not. It's not like that. You know what I mean? We have guys who are very, very novice lifters. And I think that's why, like, if someone came in, they watched what we do in a lot of our programming, they'd be shocked at how basic it is. At the same time, though, I know for those guys, that's what those guys
Right.
need.
Right.
Now, do we have guys on the other end of it? Yeah, of course we do. We have some guys who are absolute super freaks, right? And you got to do some different things with those guys to be able to allow them to develop and express those qualities. But more often than not, I think most of your guys, especially in college athletics, they're really, really good and really talented at their sport. That doesn't mean they're equally as adept at training. And so that's what makes our job fun, because you get this kid with all this talent. Hey, how much more body armor can we put on this guy? Can we get him more powerful? Can we get him stronger? Make those qualities he's already has even better. And so like that, I think that's one of the biggest kind of like where the dots don't always line up for people that are looking from the outside of what they assume the inside looks like.
You nailed it. I think, again, in the sort of the genres I play in, whether it be human performance in the shooting game or whatever else, what you just said right there, I think is the biggest thing. Like, this guy, you're looking at this guy and he seems uber talented and he shoots really well. But his physical ability just isn't very good, at the end of the day. What if we applied some human performance, principles and application to help him be a little bit better mover as a human? What would that do for a shooting ability? And vice versa. Can you take a really good mover, right, a really great athlete, and turn them into a great shooter? And where can we apply certain things there in order to make them better at both and bridge that gap? And really, that's the art, but also the science, and collecting a little data at times, examining things, assessing things from a movement perspective, not just a numbers perspective. And within there, you can dig down into all the little niches, but at the end of the day, like, can you push? Can you pull? Can you squat? Can you lunge? Can you move laterally? Can you rotate? Can you decelerate? Can you accelerate? All of those things are fundamental to becoming, a better athlete at whatever level. And I love what you said there, is that when most people would walk into the training room, they would probably go, "Oh, that looks really like basic. This is a very basic program." Yeah, it probably is, but the level of thought that goes into that programming isn't basic, right? It's well honed over years and years and years, and that's what I respect about what you're doing out there. And I mean, it shows. I mean, you guys got a fantastic team year after year after year. What's next for you, man? Like, I mean, what do you do? Do you ride this train until you die, until you completely, like, your voice is completely full of that strength and conditioning coach gravel, and that hair is completely gray, and that beard grows down to your belly button or whatever else, and you ride off into the sunset, or what happens, man?
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's a lot of time invested in it, and this is still my passion. I'm still super fired up about it. Getting out of bed in the morning, and still have so much to be able to pour into these kids. And like, I don't really have a timeline on it. You know what I mean? I'm going to try to be as successful as I can, as long as I can. And when I get to the point where I don't think I can be that successful, then it's probably time to figure out what that next chapter is going to be. But for right now, like, my next thing I'm going to do is get on a plane and go to Boston tomorrow and try to win a football game.
Yeah, man. Well, look, I mean, that sounds like the voice and the reason of a true competitor, and I appreciate you. And I'm sure the guys out there at Florida State, maybe they don't appreciate you all the time, because I can't imagine, because I have seen some stuff and I have heard some stuff, about what goes on in that training room out there. But what I appreciate is the time that you spent with me and us today, and sort of the things you brought to the table. And I hope that this is kind of like the first of maybe many conversations in the future about things, not just coaching, but getting into some of that art and that science and application of stuff. If people want to, like, find out a little bit more about what you're doing, or I don't know if Florida State maybe offers youth programs during the summer or in the off times and things where you may get involved, or you do any speaking or anything like that, what can you tell us about that, or where can you direct people?
So social media wise, I'm just at Coach Storms on Instagram, Twitter. The Instagram is mostly just stuff from my training, my life. Not a whole lot of work stuff on there. And then the Twitter, I'm not quite as active on that. Still a good way to reach out, and contact me and stuff with questions and whatnot. That's a little more work based. Very little of myself on that one. Obviously we got all of our youth camps and high school camps and stuff throughout the summers across all the sports here. And then, speaking wise, like I try to get out and speak when I can. When it fits the schedule, it's not always easy to do. Oftentimes those opportunities come up, and the few times I do have downtime. And when those times come, typically my family's gonna be the priority. But I have tried the last year or two to try to get out and speak and share a little bit more with out there about what we're doing here, and it's a great opportunity for me to educate myself and engage in some questions and conversations I wouldn't normally get to have. So I try to do that. Try to do that when I can. Don't know what's coming up next for that during the season. Obviously, I probably won't be doing any of that. But
Right.
as we hit the off season, I'll probably look for a couple opportunities to get out there and share as much as I can.
Well, like I said, man, I appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing today. And I'm sorry I couldn't get to Florida to do this, and we had to do this way. It's not the way I like doing it, but I'll take Coach Storms however I can get him. So look, man, best of luck on this upcoming road trip. Or is it home or away?
Away.
Yeah. So get on that plane, man, and stay safe, travel safe, and best of luck to you as you go down the road, man. Thanks again.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to next time.
Right on, man.